Dracula. For over 100 years, the Prince of Darkness has been haunting the silver screen. But how do these cinematic interpretations compare to the character introduced in Bram Stoker's novel? And what inspired the creation of one of the world's most iconic monsters? A mythical creature from Eastern European folklore? The life of a brutal Romanian ruler? Or Stoker's own dark imagination? Welcome to Monsterpiece Cinema. Today we'll be discussing the creation of Bram Stoker's horror classic and how a century of cinema has depicted and expanded upon the lore of Count Dracula. In March of 1890, a London theater manager and part-time novelist was struck by a haunting nightmare. A solitary young man was attacked by 3 women, kissing his neck. Suddenly, a count appeared, drove back the women, and shouted,
"This man belongs to me."
The dreamer was Bram Stoker, and the dream inspired him to write one of the most famous novels of Gothic literature, Dracula. The tale of Dracula begins as Jonathan Harker, a young solicitor, travels from England to Transylvania to finalize a land deal. He arrives at Castle Dracula and is welcomed by the Count.
I am Dracula.
Over time, Harker observes that Dracula casts no reflection, scales the outside of the castle walls like a bat, and sleeps in a dirt-filled box in a trance-like state. While exploring the castle, Harker is attacked by 3 female vampires, but at the last moment, he is saved by the Count.
He is mine!
Back in England, we're introduced to Jonathan's fiancée Mina, her friend Lucy, and Lucy's suitors, Arthur, Quincy, and Jack. Jack is a doctor in charge of a lunatic asylum, where a patient named Renfield rants about the arrival of the Master.
Master! I am here!
Dracula travels to England, along with 50 boxes of Transylvanian soil in which he can rest. Jonathan escapes from the castle and marries Mina. Lucy begins to suffer from a mysterious illness. Jack calls in his mentor, Professor Van Helsing, who sees she is being preyed upon by a vampire. Lucy dies, but then she returns, abducting children and drinking their blood. Van Helsing and Lucy's suitors drive a stake through her heart. The vampire hunters seek out and consecrate Dracula's boxes of soil so he has no safe haven. Dracula sets his sights on Mina, and they are discovered exchanging blood. Dracula escapes by turning into a bat and flying out the window. As Mina transforms into a vampire, she develops a psychic bond with Dracula. Van Helsing hypnotizes her to discover that Dracula is returning to Transylvania, hidden in his last remaining box of earth. The vampire hunters intercept him and engage in a bloody battle. Jonathan slits Dracula's throat while Quincy stabs him through the heart. Quincy is mortally wounded, but Dracula is destroyed, and his power over Mina is lifted. When Stoker set to work writing Dracula, he delved deep into the vampire folktales of Eastern Europe. Rural communities believed that anyone weird or different, from redheads to murderers, heretics to the left-handed, might return from the dead as a vampire. Unlike Dracula, these vampires were bloated, ruddy-faced, decomposing corpses, still dressed in their burial clothes. They would attack their family, friends, or people with whom they had unfinished business. They could transform into crows, owls, wolves, and cats.
Garlic!
There were many ways to protect yourself from a vampire. Garlic and holy objects repelled a vampire, while decapitation and fire could kill them.
Come on, bite me!
Vampires could only enter a home if they were invited inside, and they could only cross bodies of water at certain times. Stoker adopted all of these ideas for the vampire mythology in Dracula. Another defense against vampires was to sprinkle seeds over their graves. Vampires would compulsively count the seeds all night long and forget to attack the living.
Because I love to count things.
I know.
While Stoker left this out of his novel, Dracula is compulsively drawn to seeds in the pilot for 1990's Dracula, the series. Stoker discovered the name for his villain while researching Eastern European history. Vlad Dracula was born in Wallachia in 1431. Dracula translates to Son of the Dragon, as his father, Vlad Dracul, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a society dedicated to defending Christian lands against invading Muslims. Vlad Dracula served as prince 3 times between 1448 and his death in 1476. He was a cruel and bloodthirsty leader, rumored to be responsible for the deaths of 40,000 people during his short reign. He was known as Vlad Tepish, or Vlad the Impaler, because of his favorite method of execution. He once impaled over 20,000 men, women, and children in a single battle. It's rumored that he would dip his bread into blood dripping from impaled bodies. However, it's unclear how much Bram Stoker actually knew about the historical Dracula. Only his name and a few minor details are referenced in the novel. In fact, Stoker wrote his novel under the title The Undead, and the main character had been named Count Vampire. It was only at the last minute that Stoker changed the title of the book and the main character's name to Dracula.
Dracula? I think I like that name.
Stoker was also inspired by previous works of vampire literature. In 1819, Jean Polidori introduced the world to a new type of vampire in his short story, The Vampire, published erroneously as a work by Lord Byron. Unlike the grotesque vampires of folklore, Lord Riven, apart from his pale skin, was physically indistinguishable from the living. He was aristocratic, traveled the world, and preyed on high society. All these qualities are echoed in Count Dracula. Another inspiration for Stoker might have been the serialized story Varney the Vampire. Varney was the first vampire to be depicted with fangs. He wore a long dark cloak, and he crept in through his victims' windows. In 1872, Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu published Carmilla, the story of a female vampire preying on a young girl. Carmilla dies when a stake is driven through her heart. In Eastern European tradition, a vampire would be staked through the head or stomach as a means of planting them into the ground. The idea of using the stake to destroy the heart continued in Dracula and found a permanent place in vampire mythology. Many of Dracula's vampiric traits came from Stoker's own imagination. Stoker's most prominent contribution to vampire mythology might be the idea that vampires don't appear in mirrors. Mirrors were often thought to reflect the soul, and as vampires had no soul, Stoker imagined they would therefore have no reflection. While folkloric vampires were shapeshifters, they were mostly known to transform into wolves, crows, and cats. Dracula was unique in his ability to transform into a bat. Stoker gave Dracula incredible strength and an ability to control the weather, qualities not found in previous vampires. Both folklore and literature had unclear ideas on how vampirism spread. In Stoker's mythology, an exchange of blood was needed to transform the victim into a vampire. Stoker also invented one of Dracula's most interesting weaknesses, the need to sleep on his native soil. Stoker modeled Dracula's physical appearance after his friend, the famous British actor Sir Henry Irving. Irving was known for his mesmerizing stage presence, and Stoker reflects that in Dracula's hypnotic powers. Dracula was published in 1897. It was well reviewed but sold poorly, and when Stoker passed away in 1912, there was no indication that his vampiric villain would become one of the world's most famous fictional characters. A century later, Dracula has appeared in over 100 movies in almost every genre: horror, action, cartoons, comedy, musicals, science fiction, and westerns. From the beginning of Dracula's film career, filmmakers have been altering Stoker's story while adding new elements to vampire mythology. F.W. Murnau's 1922 film Nosferatu starts similarly to Stoker's novel, although the names and locations have been changed. Thomas Hutter, a lawyer, leaves Germany to visit a client, Count Orlok, in Transylvania. Count Orlok, with his bald head, hooked nose, and rodent-like teeth, looks more like the grotesque vampires of folklore than the relatively normal-looking Dracula from the novel. Orlok travels to Germany, just as Dracula traveled to England, but that's where Nosferatu takes a sharp detour from Stoker's text. Orlok's arrival brings about a plague. Hutter returns home with a book about vampires. His wife, Ellen, reads it and learns the only way to destroy a vampire is for a pure-hearted woman to sacrifice herself. She allows the Count into her bedroom, and while he is drinking her blood, he loses track of time. As the sun rises, Orlok is destroyed. This was the first story where sunlight was fatal to a vampire. In Stoker's novel, Dracula was weakened, but not killed, by sunlight. Since Nosferatu, filmmakers have shown sunlight to be fatal to vampires, in films from George Melford's 1931 Dracula through 2024's Renfield. Todd Browning's 1931 film Dracula was based on a popular stage play adapted from the novel. Like Nosferatu, it compresses, removes, and rewrites many aspects of the book. It also adds many iconic elements to vampire mythology. In Stoker's novel, Dracula slept in wooden crates of Transylvanian soil. Browning's film introduces the idea of vampires sleeping in coffins. Also, since Browning wasn't allowed to show vampire and victim exchanging blood, the film changed the mythology so a single bite could turn someone into a vampire. Most importantly, the film featured Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi as Dracula.
I bid you welcome.
And his handsome, charming, and well-dressed count became the iconic image associated with the character for almost 100 years. Dracula was an instant success and led to a series of sequels from Universal Pictures. The 1936 film Dracula's Daughter picks up immediately after the end of Browning's Dracula. While Dracula remains dead, his story continues through his daughter, Countess Maria Zaleska, the first female vampire to take center stage in a horror movie. Son of Dracula, from 1943, doesn't feature Dracula's son, but Dracula himself, disguised as Count Alucard.
D-R-A-C.
An alias he would use in many future films. In 1944, Universal Pictures released House of Frankenstein, bringing Dracula together with Frankenstein and the Wolfman, a trio who reappear in House of Dracula, and Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. After confronting Abbott and Costello in 1948, Dracula dipped in popularity, but he was revived in 1958's Hammer Films production of Dracula, the first vampire film in color. The role of Dracula was played by Christopher Lee.
I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house.
Who gave the character both ferocity and sensuality. And for the first time in an English-language film, Dracula was portrayed with the canine fangs he bore in the novel. After the critical and commercial success of 1958's Dracula, Hammer produced 8 sequels, 6 of which starred Lee. In the 1970s, Dracula's popularity exploded, and filmmakers looked to the past for inspiration, finding it in folklore, history, previous adaptations, and Stoker's original novel. Hammer Films borrowed folkloric material to find new ways to destroy Dracula. Dracula, Prince of Darkness used the folklore belief that vampires can't cross running water to defeat Dracula by drowning him. The Satanic Rites of Dracula is the first film where Dracula is vulnerable to silver.
Bullets cannot harm me. A silver bullet, Dracula.
In folklore, silver was believed to be an effective weapon against werewolves and witches, but up until this point, it had only been used against vampires in a 1939 Batman comic. In the same film, Dracula is trapped by a hawthorn bush. In folklore, vampires were buried with hawthorn branches on top of their corpses. Hawthorn was believed to have magical properties and would keep vampires from leaving their graves. In 1970, Christopher Lee starred in Jess Franco's Count Dracula. Franco and Lee were excited to make a film that would be faithful to Stoker's novel. As in the book, Dracula starts elderly, and with a white mustache, and he's rejuvenated by drinking blood over the course of the film. This was the first film to include the race to Transylvania to destroy Dracula, although Van Helsing and Mina stay behind in England. The most memorable scene of the film might be a bizarre moment where the vampire hunters are attacked by slow-moving taxidermied animals. In 1972, Raymond McNally and Radu Florescu published In Search of Dracula, followed by Dracula, a biography of Vlad the Impaler, in 1973. These books argued that Stoker based Dracula on the life of Vlad the Impaler. This material was quickly incorporated into cinematic tales of Dracula, starting with Dan Curtis's 1974 Dracula, starring Jack Palance. This is also the first film where Dracula is motivated by the reincarnation of his lost love, a theme that seems inspired from Universal's 1932 film The Mummy, and is carried on in many subsequent Dracula movies. In 1977, the BBC produced the 2.5-hour television movie Count Dracula, which is to date the most faithful adaptation of Stoker's novel. In 1979, Universal Pictures made their first Dracula film in over 30 years, a lush and romantic reimagining of the stage play which inspired Todd Browning's film 46 years earlier. Also in 1979, Werner Herzog remade Murnau's 1922 Nosferatu, which he considered to be the greatest German film by the greatest German film director. The 80s and 90s saw a number of amazing vampire films, but very few films starring Dracula himself. Many films that do feature Dracula, like Waxwork, The Creeps, and Monster Squad, take place in a world where people are already familiar with Dracula from books and movies.
Bram Stoker only had the story half right. The guy existed, but they never got him. He never died.
The 1988 film To Die For relocates the Dracula story to modern-day Los Angeles. Dracula is now Vlad Tepes, a handsome yuppie. Vlad seduces Katie, his real estate agent, and the reincarnation of his lost love.
Can't you see the resemblance? She was just like you.
Whose ex-boyfriend discovers a tome in Vlad's house, revealing he is actually Vlad Tepes, the historical Dracula and immortal vampire.
The guy you're looking for, he's not a serial killer. He's a... Forget it.
In 1462, Vlad Dracula fought against his brother, Radu the Handsome, who commanded Ottoman troops against Vlad's Wallachian forces. In To Die For, Vlad and his brother are both vampires and have been at odds for hundreds of years. However, in To Die For, Vlad's brother's name is Tom.
What?
Francis Ford Coppola promoted his 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula as the first faithful adaptation of Stoker's novel.
No one ever did the book. They just totally played havoc with Stoker's novel.
However, Coppola also played havoc with the book, adding a prelude featuring Vlad the Impaler and a romance between Dracula and Mina, who is the reincarnation of Vlad's lost love. But Bram Stoker's Dracula was the first of only 2 films to feature an accurate representation of Quincy Morris, the other being Guy Madden's avant-garde silent ballet, Dracula, Pages from a Virgin's Diary. Since the turn of the century, several films have told stories that take place before, after, or in between the pages of Stoker's novel. Dracula Untold imagines how Vlad the Impaler went from warrior prince to immortal vampire. Van Helsing follows the monster hunter's early adventures. The Last Voyage of the Demeter extrapolates from the short section of the novel where Dracula sails to England. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen continues the tale of Mina Harker, now a vampire secret agent. Renfield examines the dysfunctional relationship between Dracula and his familiar in modern-day New Orleans. Bram Stoker's story lives on in every new cinematic adaptation and reinterpretation, and the mythology of this immortal monster will keep evolving as future storytellers imagine new tales of Count Dracula.